They parked behind my house and never left. I live alone in a little house in a big city. Kind of a rough around the edges neighborhood, but I've lived in the area most of my life, and my block is tight-knit, in spite of half of it being vacant or abandoned. It's also a city that, like many others, tragically has a lot of folks living out of cars and RVs trying to eke out an existence. So I shouldn't have been too surprised when, back in October last year, I got a text from a neighbor. "You might want to take a look out your back window." About 10 feet away was an enormous 40 motorhome in the dead-end alley, sitting right on the edge of the small cliff that is my unfenced backyard. Having lived in urban areas my whole life, I'm no stranger to odd happenings immediately outside my window, but this did feel a little more intrusive than living in a ground-floor apartment. No thanks to my back window being my bathroom window. It sat there for a few weeks without anyone paying much mind. A few neighbors speculated it might have been someone working on a couple demolition and construction projects in the neighborhood. A supervisor from out of town, perhaps. Whomever it was, I didn't really mind as long as there wasn't any mess, though I was slightly worried a wrong move would end with someone, or the whole vehicle, rolling off the retaining wall and potentially crashing through my wall. Of course, there was the small fact that half the block now couldn't access the alley. My city is very particular about removing vehicles if someone is potentially living in them, and after a few roundabout calls to the parking department, I and my neighbors were told we needed some evidence it was a hazard or abandoned. So I grabbed a cheap webcam off Amazon and popped it in my window, and then went on with my life. About a week later, after some friends over for dinner had left, I thought I'd check and see if the camera had picked up anything. I didn't sleep for the next few nights. Like clockwork, every night around midnight the lights in the RV would flick on in the otherwise pitch-black night, a couple of cars would pull up behind, and the occupants would unload several very full garbage bags into the RV. Then these shadowy figures would creep down the yard of the vacant house next door into mine and methodically circle my house, shining flashlights in each window. Cars would come and go all night until about 5 a.m. Then all was business as usual during daylight hours. Worth mentioning that my house is essentially a studio apartment on top of a garage, built into a slope. My bed is about 10 feet from those windows. Also worth mentioning, my neighborhood had an alarming rash of about 20 armed home invasions the summer before, or the arson on an occupied house across the street a few months earlier. Vulnerable was an understatement of how I felt. I ended up moving most of my furniture around my bed as a makeshift barricade. I called 911. They were a bit incredulous. Nothing was actively happening as I called. This wasn't an emergency. I can call the non-emergency line in the morning if I want to speak to an officer or detective. The next morning, I felt it was prudent to bring in any yard tools that would make a tempting window breaker and double-check the back porch and security flood had working bulbs, and just my luck, I managed to completely break both fixtures in the process. Almost immediately as I walked out my back door, the RV's door swung open, and a man and woman stepped out. They were dressed in t-shirts and shorts despite the 39er weather, and looked a bit like zombies. I waved. They didn't. They stared past me. I quickly retreated back inside to keep an eye remotely, but not before noticing something even more startling. The RV had about 6 security cameras mounted on it, 3 of which were trained on my back door. I was watching them. They were watching me. After a day or two more of this, I had become fully nocturnal, leaving all the lights blazing all night, and I started to feel like I was losing my mind, This was both mostly benign and deeply unsettling. Texting friends and family in hopes of reassurance, well, didn't do much. They're probably just trying to find a quiet place away from the encampments. Maybe they work a night shift. If you were living on the streets, wouldn't you want a security camera? You have one on your house. Okay, maybe I was being paranoid. My neighbors were mostly preoccupied with the alley being blocked and subsequent missed deliveries. And it's not like the city was going to do much anyway. The cars kept coming and going all night. The people with flashlights stayed just outside the edge of my yard, but I'd catch the occasional flash through the window. After being reluctant to leave the house, and my cat alone, I had to leave for an in-person work meeting. While I was gone, my camera pinged me about activity the RV folks had set up stakes around my property and were wrapping yellow caution tape around my yard, across the alley, and set up a barricade of traffic cones around their vehicle. This was just getting weird. By this point, a few of us on the block started a group text to keep tabs on things. One neighbor a few houses down caught the female half of this duo in her backyard with a chainsaw, limbing their oak tree in broad daylight. They confronted her, and she gave the same treatment as me, a mute, 1,000-yard stare. That neighbor called it in, and I watched a few officers poke around for a minute, clearly puzzled by the barricades and tape. I thought there might be some imminent resolution. They then booked it back to their squad and took off with lights and sirens. There was a shooting a few blocks over. I assume they got called to. Another night goes by, punctuated by the RV's alarm going off every couple hours, and the engine revving menacingly, though nothing out of the ordinary. At least, this ordinary. I take my mid-morning nap I've become accustomed to over the past week, only to be woken by loud, angry yelling. I pull up the camera feed. Out back is another neighbor, the goofy dad-cum ex-naval officer, venting his frustrations to a police officer who's banging the RV door with a baton demanding the occupants come out. There's a brand new sports car parked behind, one that I'd barely made out on my cheap camera's night vision. I carefully left out the front so as not to be conspicuous and circled up the mouth of the alley to speak with the officer and explained my story in a near stream of consciousness ramble. Did you see them leave? Nope. I played back the camera. The sports car showed up around 5:30 am and nobody had left since. He said the car was too new to have a current registration, and the RV was registered to a deceased person 4 counties away. Suspicious, but nothing outright criminal. But he'd ticket them with a 24-hour tow notice. As he was typing up the ticket, the sports car came barreling down the alley in reverse, nearly plowing into the cruiser, and I was told very sternly to leave immediately. I ran home and pulled up a police scanner feed to try and glean some information. They were calling for a gang officer, a domestic violence unit, vice squad, CSI, so my gut feeling wasn't too far off the mark. Later that night, the officer called me asking to send the entirety of my footage. I asked if there was anything he could divulge about what happened. I can't tell you much, but this was a bad dude and he's going away. We towed the car as evidence, but we'll have to wait until morning to get a big enough truck to move the RV. To say I slept well that night was an understatement. But that calm was shattered quite literally early the next morning as I heard glass breaking outside. 3 masked men were breaking into the RV with crowbars. One was up on a ladder sawing through the roof with an angle grinder. I frantically called 911. Struggling to explain the context of what was going on, once again met with a verbal eye roll from the call taker. Is it your RV? No. Sir, you can't report a stolen vehicle that isn't yours. I hung up and tried again, hoping to get someone else on the other end. We have a wrecker dispatched to that location. Are you sure these aren't the tow operators? Sure enough, just as these guys managed to get the RV started, the tow truck was coming around the corner. They booked it so fast it ripped up the gravel, and it's a miracle it didn't end up through someone's wall. Well, whatever the absolute fucking hell happened is seemingly over. Seemingly. Again, seemingly. I suppose this is an epilogue of sorts, and by far the most unsettling part of this story. I quickly upgraded my chintzy camera to a couple commercial-grade ones, with smart object detection, synchronized floodlights, and automatic sirens, hoping I'd rest easy. No, it was going off. All the time. At least once or twice a week for over a month, the cameras caught creeps skulking around my backyard and windows with flashlights. Plenty of other times, cars idling with the lights off in the alley for unsettlingly long periods. The one I can't shake was the guy at 3 a.m. slowly making his way up the alley in a low crouch, taking a long pause directly behind my house, and then booking it towards my door full steam. Or the guy that managed to get past the camera, and I came face to face with, his ugly mug pressed up against my kitchen window at midnight. At least the alarms did their job. Every one of these guys took off once lit up like a stadium with sirens blaring. For some comic relief, that last guy tried to hop a retaining wall and face-planted on the other side. Of course, again, friends and family had some not-so-reassuring platitudes. Maybe it was someone looking for a lost dog, or someone got lost in the alley, or maybe this just always happened before I had lights and cameras. And shaking what little faith I had in law enforcement, the cops, if they showed up at all, were at least an hour late. But here's the kicker. I filed a public request for the arrest and case report, and got it back months later. Turns out my neighbor in the RV had kidnapped his ex-girlfriend and was likely trafficking her. She'd in fact called 911, but didn't know the neighborhood, and the cops were looking for them in a different part of town. He had a lengthy rap sheet for felony burglary, fraud, and firearms charges. An acquaintance of his was interviewed by detectives and said the RV was packed to the gills with guns and improvised weapons. And this guy told this witness that he would come back and kill whoever sent him back to jail. And right at the bottom, in all caps, was my name and address, but phone number redacted, listed as reporting party complainant. The cops searched the sports car and found nothing of note. The RV, as you recall, was apparently stolen before they could even get a valid warrant. The ex fled during the arrest, as I saw on camera, and was never heard from again. The DA dropped the case, and this guy was released from jail 48 hours later. It's been about 6 months since my last visitor at night. There hasn't been a whole lot of peace of mind before I turn in for the night. It's slowly fading, but I can't say I'm not a little on edge after dark, even in my own home. My house is now completely lit 360. I've put various dents or spiky plantings around my windows and the perimeter, and I sleep with a rifle next to my bed. But fortunately, new folks have moved into the vacant houses on either side of me, and they're also good people. I just don't know if I have the heart to tell them all what went down,